Hello and welcome to Speak Your Mind on Gold FM, only the classic hits. Thank you a lot for your sweet company. Now, as a part of the United States government's commitment to strengthen the resilience of communities in Fiji against the effects of extreme weather events and natural disasters, the United States Agency for International Development's READY project is working with Pacific Island governments and regional stakeholders. Now, my guest today to tell us all about it is the project preparation expert, Dr. Keith Bettinger, and Chief of Party, Trevor Ohl. Welcome to the both of you to Speak Your Mind.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louise.
You're welcome. Now, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself? And, well, that's about it.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here at Gold FM. Thank you for having us today, and hello to Fiji. It's wonderful to be in Suva. My name's Keith Bettinger, and I'm here from Hawaii. I work at the East-West Center there at the University of Hawaii, and I'm a geographer by training. That's what my professional work is, my technical training. But what I've been doing, working on it for the past 5 years, is climate change adaptation project preparation. And there's a lot there to take apart, and I think we'll get into the specifics of what that is as we move on through this interview. But mainly what I do is I work for USAID, and often I work for other agencies as well, and I support and empower countries to deal with the negative aspects of climate change as we move forward, what's happening now and what's expected to happen in the future. So we design projects to help people, especially the most vulnerable people, marginalized people, to deal with the consequences of climate change. Sea level rise, changing seasons, droughts, bushfires, coral bleaching. There's also myriad impacts associated with climate change, and we try to work out solutions, locally appropriate solutions to those problems.
Oh, wonderful. So maybe we can hear what you have to say. Trevor?
Okay, Louise, thank you. And also, my pleasure to be here today, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you. My name is Trevor Ohl. I'm the Chief of Party for the USAID Climate Ready project. I've lived in Fiji now for 2.5 years. I've enjoyed and getting used to Suva's lovely weather of the intermittent rain, and so it's been quite a joy. So my job as Chief of Party of the project is to sort of lead the team we have here. So we have a team here in Fiji, plus in Ponape and FSM, and in Port Moresby and PNG. And so my background's involved with agriculture, rural development, and I've worked in quite a few countries throughout the world. And it's a pleasure to be now in Fiji.
Thank you so much. Now, could you now tell me, how did the Climate Ready project come about?
Yeah, well, perhaps if I can just start on that one. So the project started in 2017. So it's a 5-year project. And so the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, is the donor for this project. And it felt that there was a need to sort of re-engage with the Pacific in terms of providing support to Pacific countries. So we work in 11 countries throughout the Pacific. As I said, we have offices here in Suva, plus in Ponape and in Port Moresby. But the whole idea of the project is to build resilience across Pacific Island countries.
Yes.
And so we do that in 3 areas. The first area we'd look at is working with national governments to look at policies. Policies about climate change, and with people about national adaptation plans to make sure all the laws and policies are in place that support what climate change, how we can deal with climate change.
Okay.
The second thing is about making sure that organisations are accredited and that they have proposals prepared. And this is where Keith comes in, right?
Okay.
So we need to have these proposals prepared so we can submit proposals to these big climate finance organisations, right? The Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, Global Environment Facility, so all of these things. So, the idea is to try and get money for them for projects throughout the region. And the third aspect of the project is about capacity. So we find that when we have projects won and money is gained for these projects, often there's an issue with project management. How do we implement these projects, manage them, coordinate them? So again, we're working with the University of South Pacific and Pacific TAFE here to do a lot of work in accredited courses to build capacity across the region as well. So the idea being, if we have the policy straight, if we have the money accessed and we have the capacity, then we can do more projects, which can then lead to a greater resilience across the countries in the region. So that's a quick summary of Climate Ready.
Okay, thanks. Now, how much is the USAID's Climate Ready project in the Pacific worth?
Okay, so the total value for USAID Climate Ready is about $24 million spread over the 5 years.
Spread over the 5 years. Okay, so how much is USAID's Climate Ready project worth in Fiji?
Well, I suppose we don't allocate, there's not a lump allocated to each particular country.
All right.
And so it depends on what activities we come up with. So we've had a few initial projects we've had with the government here. We're working with the Fiji Development Bank to support them. So I sort of haven't got a certain figure. That's right. So it depends on what projects come up and how sort of involved the government and organisations are, and then we can support those. So we haven't sort of allocated a certain amount for each country.
Okay,
but
great.
It's spread across.
All right. So maybe we can speak to Keith now. What will be discussed in the USAID, as I picked up from you, and I need to call you Mr. Bettinger. Please forgive me.
You can call me Keith.
Okay, okay, right.
We're all
I
friends
think
here.
Keith will be better. Great. So anyhow, what will be discussed in the USAID sponsored project preparation workshop in Suva?
Sure. Well, that's an excellent question, and we're already a day in. We started on Monday. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we've got a great group of people from the Fijian government and from non-government organizations, from the Red Cross, Save the Children, World Conservation Society, Worldwide Fund for Nature, etc. So we have a broad, diverse group of stakeholders, including people from USP. And what we're talking about is it's a very practice-oriented course. And so the workshop is not built around telling people what to do, but it's built around empowering people how to develop a project. So developing a climate change adaptation project is a somewhat, I always think of it as a conspicuous and strange activity, because we find that our people in the room, the participants in the room, know what They have the technical expertise in terms of climate change and the impacts of climate change, but putting all of these things together into a project is something that, well, we don't get taught in the workplace. We don't really learn that. So what we're doing is basically synthesizing pre-existing information and identifying gaps and obstacles in terms of coping with climate change and putting those together in a coherent manner, which is the project that identifies a problem very, very clearly and is based on an evidence base, the physical processes of climate change and how those physical processes are affecting people in Fiji and how they will affect people in Fiji in the future. And based on that evidence base, we want to develop specific interventions. So we identify gaps and obstacles and weaknesses and how to address those gaps and obstacles and weaknesses. So it's a structured way of solving a problem, and we're learning tools and methodologies over the course of the week to empower our participants from Fiji to do these things themselves.
Well, thank you, Keith, and we'll be back shortly on Speak Your Mind on Gold FM, only the classic hits. We're back on Speak Your Mind, Gold FM, only the classic hits, and our guest today, who have kindly made it into our studio today, is the project preparation expert. This is for the USAID Ready project, and Dr. Keith Bettinger and Chief of Party Trevor Ohl. Now, just continuing from where you left off, I mean, you are so organized, so you need to get everything, like you've said, structured. Now, you're going to explain to the people in the workshop how to draft and implement policies to achieve national adaptation goals. Now, what does national adaptation goals mean in relation to strengthening the resilience of communities in Fiji against the effects of extreme weather events and natural disasters, for example?
Sure. Well, that's another good question. So when we talk about climate change, the physical process of climate change, sea level rise, changing seasonality, changing temperatures and rainfall amounts, they really vary from place to place because climate change is a function of not only global warming, which is a global phenomenon, but it also is impacted by local geographic conditions. So when we look at the impacts of climate change, they vary from place to place. So I'm from Hawaii, and we understand that the impacts of climate change in Hawaii are different than they are in Fiji. So even in Fiji, within Fiji, depending on where you are, if you're in a high mountainous area, things are going to be different than they are down here in Suva or Nandi.
Right.
Or the impacts of climate change will be different in Rocky, for example, than they are down here in Suva.
Yes.
And so what we really need to kind of understand is what these local impacts are. We need to identify the specific geographic footprint of climate change, and then we work from there. Yeah. So that's kind of the procedure that we follow. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That's nice and clear. Thank you. Now, how will the approved organizations, for example, access and utilize international sources of climate financing?
Okay, I'll take that question as well.
Okay.
That's a good question because that's the whole raison d'etre for the USAID Climate Ready project, the reason for the existence of this project. So the project is based on what we've learned in the past on other projects and the experience of Pacific Island countries and the needs that have been articulated by or the needs that have been described by Pacific Island countries, including Fiji. And the project is built to respond to those needs. And so one of the things that one of the obstacles we've seen in the past is that, well, these financiers exist. The Green Climate Fund, for example, is a global fund under the United Nations that has $10 billion for climate change adaptation and mitigation projects. The Adaptation Fund is another financier at the global level that exists specifically to fund adaptation projects. However, one of the problems that we've seen, or one of the obstacles, and our in-country partners have expressed this to us as well, is that we face some barriers in terms of capacity to actually develop the projects that will attract this international financing. So there's a supply and demand issue there. The supply of financing exists there, but on the ground, the capability to actually organize projects has been lacking, and so that's one of the main things that we're focusing on. So the basic problem is that while the know-how to understand the problem exists, that, like I said earlier, this peculiar task of structuring a project. That's where we're working to empower people to do that themselves.
Okay.
So in the past, that burden has really fallen on international organizations, multilateral organizations like the United Nations, the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, and other multilateral organizations. And what we're really trying to do is empower stakeholders in Fiji so that they can take more control over this process and develop the projects themselves and have a greater country ownership and greater stakeholder engagement in the development of these projects, so that they are a real reflection of Fiji's priorities, and they're consistent with Fiji's development vision for the future, and the on-the-ground needs of local communities and the national government here in Fiji.
Yeah, because it needs to be organized and well structured. I mean, you're dealing with money, obviously.
That's right, and it's a very competitive field out there, right? It's not just Fiji competing, asking for money. We've got to compete against people in the Pacific and across the whole world. Exactly. That is also after this $10 billion that Keith was talking about.
That's right.
Our proposals need to be highest quality, otherwise they will not be considered. We just won't compete against those people who are getting that quality.
Excellent. Now, who are the target audience for the training course that is currently on in Suva?
Well, the target audience is, so there's a wide variety of financiers. We look at these international climate funds, like we said, the GC at the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund, but there are also smaller financiers, like the Global Environmental Facility, which has a small grants program here that's run in Fiji. There are bilateral donors, and what I mean by that is embassy to country projects. So, for example, the United States Embassy or the Japanese Embassy may fund projects here in Fiji as long as they're structured well. And so because we have a wide variety of financiers, we have a wide variety of participants. In addition, to really kind of understand the local impacts of climate change, we need a broad base of participants in participating in the project development process.
Right.
So we've got government officials from a wide variety of agencies and ministries. We're really gratified and grateful to the government of Fiji for the commitment of time and resources for this workshop. It's very impressive. We understand keeping people in a workshop for a week is a big deal. And we have, 50 to 55 participants in the room?
Okay.
Yeah, many from government agencies. We also have participants from NGOs, non-government organizations, and like I said earlier, Save the Children, Worldwide Fund for Nature. We've got World Conservation Society. We've got the Red Cross. And some other partners, and then we have a number of participants from the University of the South Pacific, USP, over here, and they're really working well together, and everybody is very very much engaged in this. So the target audience is anybody that has an interest in climate change adaptation, and anybody that has a role in developing projects and policies for climate change adaptation, building resilience, and disaster risk reduction.
But I think if I can just add and thank the civil service here in Fiji, and the permanent secretary was out yesterday to launch the start of the training course yesterday, and they've been excellent in terms of drawing participation across the various government agencies, and also following up to make sure they came.
Yeah.
So it was really good to have that support. With that support, just makes our job a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And then we have good participation across a whole number of government agencies. So it's been really excellent to work with them on this.
That's really good to know. And we'll be back soon on Speak Your Mind, Gold FM, only the classic hits. Speak Your Mind on Gold FM, only the classic hits. I hope you're enjoying the program as much as I am. And our guest in the studio from the USAID, the project preparation expert, Dr. Keith Patinga, and the Chief of Party, Trevor O. And I'm just thinking, you know, you seem like a very entertaining person, Keith. I'm sure everyone in the workshop must be enjoying it. I mean, do you make it fun as well?
Well, that's a good question too. I hope that it is a pleasant experience for our participants. Yeah, because you know, my first professional job, I was a high school teacher in Louisiana in the United States, and I taught in kind of what you might think of as a marginal high school. And so most of my students, their first priority was not on geography and civics for enterprise. They were thinking about other things. And so what I had to do, just for the sake of survival, is learn how to engage with the people in the classroom and kind of make things relevant to their experience, right? And so as a high school teacher and subsequently as a university lecturer, you know, I've learned to be able to hook into what people already know. And make the material relevant to them, and to use stories and case studies that really resonate and connect with people.
Oh, man, that's good.
Because you're not really going to get anywhere if people are bored, if they don't see the importance of what you're working on. So I like to think, that it's a pleasurable, it's a good experience for the participants.
Yeah.
And so far they all seem very, very engaged. You know, we're developing a good rapport. Which is great, and ultimately that leads to a good output,
exactly.
a good outcome in the workshop. So we've been
true.
really impressed with the work so far. So I think we're doing something right. Yeah.
And we've been impressed with Keith in terms of delivering. I mean, people, we often, you know, we go back to people and get feedback to try and see how we can adapt the course for future and so on. So we always get really good feedback, and they say we learned a lot and we had a really good time. So if they can put those two things together, then you've got a winning combination, and Keith's able to deliver that. So
exactly.
we appreciate that sort of support.
You need a bit of laughter, you know.
That's
And
right.
I noticed it straight away when both of you came. I mean, you both got a great sense of humor, and as someone who is leading the workshop, you're very bubbly. But anyway, let's get back to the more serious things now. So how do you explain on how to improve systems and expertise to better manage and monitor adaptation projects?
Well, okay, I'll take that question. It's another good question. So I guess for me, all of this goes back to problem identification. So when we think about climate change in Fiji, we often think about the physical processes. I know that Fiji has, for example, Fiji is experiencing sea level rise like the whole world is, but the rate of sea level rise here, and it kind of sounds strange, but the rate of sea level rise in Fiji is higher than it is in other places. And that's because of local geographic conditions, the way the wind blows, and temperature and things like that. So a couple of years ago, Fiji has identified a number of coastal communities, villages that will have to move.
Yes.
And these people will have to be uprooted in the future. So we're often tempted to say that the real problem is sea level rise. So the real problem is changing precipitation patterns, changing rainfall patterns that affect affect agriculturalists. But when we think about it, when you actually are trying to identify a problem, what you realize is that there's no project, there's no policy, there's no intervention or strategy in the world that can actually stop sea level rise. So that's not the problem that we're dealing with. We're dealing with problems that are associated with sea level rise. For example, relocation of communities or coastal erosion, loss of infrastructure, interruption of commerce, things like that. And so we really have to think about this as kind of the downstream impacts of these physical processes themselves and how that actually affects the lives and livelihoods of people. And once we get to that point, then we are able to start to identify what I call control points and leverage points, things in this system. So we're developing a systematic understanding of what the impacts of climate change are. And once we identify the systematic understanding, we can identify these leverage points and control knobs, the things that we can change and manipulate, and maybe bring about a positive change for the future and help the people of Fiji and the communities of Fiji adapt to these conditions that we're experiencing now and in the future. So it all boils down to planning and project identification. In many cases, one of the things that we try to address in the workshop is there's a temptation to jump right to project design, right? So we've encountered in the past, not just in Fiji, but every place in the world, even in Hawaii, every place that's having a problem, and there's a temptation to jump right to the solution without developing the systematic understanding of the complex impacts of climate change and the direct and the indirect and the downstream impacts of this issue. And so that leads to, that often leads to poorly thought out projects. And so getting back to your question about, monitoring and planning and things like that, what we're really working on is empowering people to understand these systematic impacts of climate change. And that way we can identify natural entry points for interventions, not only projects, but also government policies, things that individuals can do, things that the private sector can do, so that we can have a holistic approach to climate change adaptation. This is not just about one project, right? It's about changing business as usual practices in the private sector, the way that government agencies operate, the way that people behave. All of those things come together to make a more resilient Fiji for the future. So we're looking at painting a big, comprehensive picture where the project is part of it. Sorry.
No, that's perfectly all right. So is it something like understanding the scientific side of climate change as well?
Yes, ma'am. That's a big part of it. Because the reality of it is, with these financiers, especially at the global level, like we said, the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund, Trevor said that it's very, very competitive to access these funds, and it is. The fortunate thing for Fiji, or what we have here, is we have extremely high capacity in the government. You've got a good policy background, so the government has really taken impressive strides to lay a good foundation in terms of policies and strategies. Fiji was head of the Conference of Parties in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This country has really taken an admirable leadership role in the fight against climate change globally.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of the building blocks in place. So that's one thing that we have going for us. But in terms of accessing these funds, they're getting more and more selective about the projects that they choose.
Okay.
And so one of the major criteria that they use is that the projects that they finance have to have a very, very strong evidence base. And what I mean by, or climate rationale, as we say in the business.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that they have to be rooted in a solid understanding of data and information related to climate change.
Yes. Oh, lovely. And we'll be back shortly in a moment on Gold FM. This is Speak Your Mind. Welcome back to Speak Your Mind on Gold FM, only the classic hits. And we continue with our interview with, the USAID Ready Project. This is a project preparation expert, as we can see and hear, Dr. Keith Bettinger and Chief of Party Trevor Ohl. So it's interesting that you said that the scientific side of climate change plays a huge role in what you're teaching, and it's not only about sea level rise, but it's also about natural disasters. Is that right?
That's correct. So one of the unfortunately negative impacts of climate change is that when we have these slow processes that transpire over decades and over centuries, like sea level rise and increasing temperatures, so you don't feel that on a day-to-day basis. But at the same time, these interact with more short-term processes. For example, tropical cyclones and droughts, and we've got these heat waves, and so that the climate change unfortunately creates more conducive conditions in many instances for more intense and more frequent natural disasters.
Yeah.
So, for example, when we look at tropical cyclones, and one example, I know that Fiji has a history with tropical cyclones, including Cyclone Winston that came through here so tragically a few years ago. What we understand is that really the fuel for a tropical cyclone is warm seawater. Yeah?
Exactly.
And so over time, one of the unfortunate unfortunate processes of climate change is that the sea level gradually, the sea surface temperatures gradually rise. Yeah, they get warmer over time, and that really is a high-octane fuel for a cyclone, and it makes them more intense.
Yes.
So from a scientific perspective, there's still some uncertainty about whether there will be more cyclones, and into the future, the projections depend on where you are. But we are fairly certain that the cyclones that we experience in the future will be more severe. And so they will have there will be more damage caused by them. So we need to adapt to these future expected conditions in building codes, and where and how people build their houses and other structures, and where we put infrastructure, and the preparedness of our emergency management services and things like that. So the disasters is a big part of this. Yes, ma'am.
And we've sort of been dealing with the Fiji Business Disaster Resilience Council and the Fiji Commerce and Employers Federation, working with small and medium enterprises to prepare them with business continuity planning, so they can get them ready. So when you have a disaster, often many small businesses never recover. And so what we'd like is to have small businesses after a disaster to come back online very quickly so they can provide services and support to the community to help it recover, right?
Yeah.
And so we've done a lot of work to try and get small and medium businesses to have this plan in place. So if something does happen, they're really quickly to come back into action and provide that much needed support. Rather than relying on external support, we can develop our own support mechanism here locally.
Oh, great. So you have teachings on how to do it?
That's right. So we have the sort of a 12-point plan that we take people through and train them on how to do that and set that up. And so that's been quite good. We've done that in quite a few countries as well across the Pacific.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Now, on the natural disasters again, storm surge is really bad. I mean, when you have the cyclone passing over and you get that huge storm surge, maybe you might want to talk more about that.
Well, sure. So the storm surge is a product of the cyclone actually pushing water ahead of the cyclone, right? And so it's really as people here no doubt know from experience, and it's an increase in the tidal level. And so if we have an increased intensity in cyclones, which means that the winds are stronger in the cyclones, that means that the storm surge will be correspondingly increased along with that. And so, one of the biggest issues here that we face is that most of the time, and this is not just Fiji, it's worldwide, when we plan infrastructure, siting of infrastructure and the way that we build buildings, we tend to look at, in order to determine how strong that building needs to be or where to put the road or the bridge, how high to build a bridge, we tend to look at past experience. Because to give us an idea of how, that we look at the storms that we faced in the past, the storm surges that we faced in the past, and we can't do that anymore because those baseline conditions are changing, right? So storm surge is a really good example. It affects coastal infrastructure. Coastal infrastructure right now is based on the experience, the location of this infrastructure is based on experience from the past. But that past experience is changing, and so we need to, beyond projects, beyond actually building things, we need to think about our planning processes and mainstream these climate change considerations, like looking at future projections and future possibilities and scenarios. We need to mainstream these things into our day-to-day processes of governance and the way that people, the way that people plan to build their houses and the way that we plan our infrastructure and things like that. So the storm surge is it's really an excellent example and an instructive example that demonstrates kind of the way that we need to change individual and institutional behavior to deal with these things in the future.
Yes, because for Fiji, I mean, we have most of, villages right beside the sea. You probably would have noticed driving down from Nandi.
Sure.
You've seen them, how close they are to the sea.
Yes.
I mean, that could be a real problem in the future.
Yes.
I mean, it's a shame, though. I mean, they don't want to move.
That's right. The inundation of land, when that storm surge comes through with salt water, it inundates that garden area with salt right?
water.
Yeah,
And
so therefore,
crops. Yeah.
to try and recover from that, also the inundation of wells and things with salt water destroys their water source as well. So it's not just a one-off hit on something; it's a long-term, maybe even some cases a permanent hit on a community if they suffer from that. Right?
Exactly, because we have a cyclone season every year. Like it's from November up until April. So we are always expecting a cyclone to, the weatherman, he probably says, okay, they predict about, 5 or maybe 7, but we're not sure which one actually, hits. So yes, it is a big problem, and it's really good to have your help in Fiji. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm just continuing with another question. How did the USAID Ready project develop the project preparation training course to build the capacity of government and non-governmental organization staff to prepare climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction projects that can be funded by climate, that's long, it's too long, by climate financing organizations such as the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and Global Environment Facility?
That's such a long question.
I
think Keith should answer that.
Thanks. Thanks,
Okay,
Trevor.
so how did you, develop
How do we
the
develop it?
project
Yeah,
preparation?
that's a good question too. So let's start off talking about like the outcome, the objective, what we're trying to do here, and what it is. We're really trying to empower people here to do this project development themselves. So we base the training course on experiences, our experiences in developing climate change adaptation projects around the world. And when you do that, you kind of have an understanding of what's difficult for people, right? The ultimate goal is not to have, international agencies developing the projects, but to have Fiji do it themselves. So over time, we have kind of learned just through practice and through, discussions with people around the Pacific and in Fiji and the other countries that Climate Ready serves, what they need and what they don't understand or what they feel like they need help with. And that's how we developed the course. We thought about, my background, like I said, is an educator. Yes. And so I normally think about, when I think about teaching somebody something, I guess I have a different perspective on it because I want to, I just figure out a way to explain, material in a way that people can understand and they can latch on to it and learn how to do it. So it's like I said earlier, it's more how to than what you have to do, right? So it's all about practice. We tried to make it as practical as possible, so we use lots and lots of group work. we build on the skills and the knowledge of that the participants bring with them.
Yeah, I mean, traditional knowledge is pretty good.
Traditional knowledge, and we've got government officials. They're good at what they do. They're not blank slates. So we identify what the strengths are.
Right.
And we build on those strengths. Like I said, we use a lot of collaborative activities. We use lots and lots of examples, and we step through. This is how you do this.
Yes.
And the tricky thing about it is there's no textbooks. There's no university courses, except for the one that we run at the University of South Pacific. We've actually developed a course on this that I run. But other than that, there are no university courses. So it's teaching kind of work wisdom.
Yes.
You've been in radio for years and years, right? You know the tricks of the trade.
Okay.
And so we try to, our business is the same way. We try to convey those tricks of the trade, the mistakes that we've made in the past, the lessons that we've learned, so that our participants know how to do these things. Yeah, and there's a lot of trial and error, a lot of group work, but that's how we do it. Yeah,
Sounds
we make
good,
it participatory. Yeah.
On Speak Your Mind, I hope you're enjoying the program. We'll be back in a bit. This is Speak Your Mind on Gold FM, only the classic hits. Great to have your company, and we do hope that you're enjoying the interview. I must say it's great to know that we've got the experts here with us to explain, and especially, of course, Keith, who is leading the workshop, which is currently on in Suva. This is, and also we have Chief of Party Trevor Ole, who has been kind enough to join us. So we've covered quite a lot, haven't we? So this is our last segment. So, I mean, I'm sure you've covered most of my questions, but where has the USAID rather really provided the training in the Pacific? Like,
Well,
I mean, Fiji now.
We've been all over the place. We've been flying around like an albatross
I
around
mean,
the Pacific.
well, I suppose Palau, the
We've been in Palau,
Micronesia,
yeah. We've been in Ponape. We've been
Papua New Guinea.
We've been in PNG. That's right. We've been in Vanuatu. We've been in the Solomons.
Yes, and how was your experience in these Pacific Islands?
Well, it's generally we have at the Climate Ready project we have a very good advanced team. And so Climate Ready has been successful in developing good relationships with the governments in each of these constituent countries. And so what we generally start a couple of months ahead of time and explaining what the purposes of this workshop are. Normally there's a request for the workshop from the country. And so we've got an advanced team at Climate Ready, and they make all of the arrangements. Part of the keys to the success, according to our experience, has been getting the right people in the room, right?
Yes.
The folks that can actually use the information
The
and
knowledge
the skills.
that you're
That's
teaching.
right. And so we've done a good job with our partners, especially here in Fiji, of identifying the right people to be in the room. So we don't want to teach somebody something they can't use. So in general, the experience has been really good. I do have to say, and I'm not just saying this because we're in Fiji.
Okay.
Right? I don't say this in every country.
Yeah.
But I'm extremely impressed with the level of engagement and the commitment. The commitment is heartening of the folks that we've got here in Fiji. But in general, everybody in the Pacific recognizes that climate change is a big problem.
Yes.
And they want to do something about it. They're wholeheartely on board with this mission. And so we have a receptive audience. And in most places, we have a pretty good outcome. And actually the project, this project preparation workshop, we at Climate Ready see it as not just an isolated activity, but the beginning of a longer-term relationship. And so there's follow-up support to these countries to take the concepts that come out of the workshop and develop those into full projects.
Yeah.
And in a couple of places we're actually advancing on that. So it's very gratifying and heartening that we've had good results pretty much every place that we've done this. Yeah.
Great. So Trevor, maybe the follow-ups. How will you do that?
Well, see, Climate Ready does not work in isolation. We see it as essential to work with our partner government organisations in each of the countries.
Mm.
So what we do is work with each of the countries. We're continually talking to them about new ideas they want to suggest to us, where they need assistance. We don't go and tell people you must do this now and now.
Okay.
So we get feedback. You talk to people. It's a partnership we're involved in here, not a one-way flow of things, right?
Yeah.
And so, after the training, people go back, they have ideas, they then come back to us and say, look, we've got this idea on a project, maybe you could work with us to support the development of this particular proposal.
Mm.
We go, right, so we can link you up with, some of the other partners as well, and together we can work through this project proposal to get it through and submitted to Green Climate Fund or the other finance organisation. So it's a partnership in terms of us with the national governments throughout the Pacific.
Okay, so for projects, for example, what kind of projects have you been receiving, maybe from other Pacific islands?
Yeah, well, we've got a whole range of different projects. So we're working on a lot of water supply projects, right? Food security projects, coastal adaptation projects, health projects. So there's health. We're working with UNDP at the moment on a project that looks at the resilience of people with disabilities, right, facing climate change. Because one of the things that we do, and one of the things that Keith does in the course is, we talked about the scientific aspects and the technical aspects of climate change and how we deal with that. But we also must deal with the people aspect of that, right? And a lot of that's to do with the role of, gender, the role of women, making sure that women are properly involved, making sure that there's social inclusion for all those people who aren't normally consulted or involved in projects, right? So the part of the preparation is not just making sure we have the best technical deal, but that people are fully involved, and all people who are involved in these things have a say and have an involvement in not just the design, but then the implementation of that project. That's a key part of what we try and do for this.
I mean, it's really good that nowadays you involve women a lot. I mean, you've realized that women count and their decisions are just as important as their male counterparts.
That's right. Where women do most of the work in the gardens, it'd be really stupid to have a project that didn't involve them in sort of what was going on, would you?
Exactly.
Women have unique knowledge and experiences, and they're really, in most places, they're agents of change. They're engaged in bringing women into the solution is part of the solution, part of making an effective project.
Yeah, that's the way. But I think, we've come to an end. And I really thank you a lot for your assistance to Fiji and the expertise from our guest.
Sure,
from,
it's been delightful.
Great. From the USAID, again, the project preparation expert, Dr. Keith Bettinger, and Chief of Party, Trevor O. Thank you for coming to Speak Your Mind.
Thank you.
Louise, thank you very much.
Minaka.